No one expected anything from the thin boy standing alone at the center of the stage, especially not in a room packed with thousands of people who had paid good money to be entertained by stars, not by someone whose jacket sleeves were frayed and whose shoes looked like they had walked through too many winters to count. And yet the moment he stepped into the single beam of light, gripping the microphone with hands that trembled just enough to betray how much this moment mattered, the noise in the arena slowly softened. Not because an announcer demanded silence but because something about his stillness felt sacred, like the hush before a storm or the quiet just before a prayer is answered. And his name, Ethan Cole, meant nothing to anyone in the crowd then, just another name on a program, just another face among millions struggling to be seen. But to him this was everything, because Ethan hadn't grown up dreaming of applause or fame. He had grown up dreaming of stability, of nights without hunger, of mornings without fear, of a life where his mother didn't come home exhausted from working double shifts at a nursing home, hands cracked from disinfectant, eyes tired from pretending everything was okay. And as Ethan lifted the microphone closer to his mouth, a memory flashed through him of being 8 years old, sitting on the floor of their tiny apartment while his mother hummed softly as she folded laundry, her voice tired but warm, singing old songs she said reminded her that beauty could survive even the hardest lives. And that memory tightened his chest now, because the song he was about to sing was the same one she used to hum on their worst days, the one that carried them through eviction notices, power shutoffs, and nights when dinner was just toast and hope. And when the first note finally left his lips, it didn't come out loud or showy, it came out honest, raw, slightly broken, and the effect was immediate and unsettling, like a truth spoken too clearly, because his voice didn't try to impress. It confessed. It told the story of someone who had learned early that kindness often arrives quietly, through small gestures that save lives without ever making headlines. And as the melody filled the vast space, people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, not because it was unpleasant but because it was too real, because it reminded them of someone they once were or someone they once loved. And halfway through the first verse, a woman in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling as she remembered her late husband who used to sing this same song while fixing their old car. And a man a few rows back lowered his phone, forgetting to record, suddenly afraid that capturing the moment might somehow cheapen it. And backstage, even the hardened crew members who had seen hundreds of performances paused in their work, drawn in by the way Ethan's voice seemed to wrap around every scar in the room and gently ask it to breathe. And yet what no one knew, not the audience, not the judges, not the millions who would later watch the clip online, was that Ethan almost hadn't made it to the stage at all, because just hours earlier, he had been sitting on the steps outside the venue, head in his hands, after learning that his mother had collapsed at work, her body finally giving in after years of giving too much. And when a security guard found him there, shaking and pale, it wasn't authority that spoke but kindness, because the guard, an older man named Marcus who recognized that look of fear all too well, had lost his own wife the same way. And instead of telling Ethan to move along, Marcus sat beside him, listened, and quietly made a call that ensured Ethan's mother would receive immediate care, then handed Ethan a bottle of water and said words that would echo through him all night. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up anyway. And so Ethan did, carrying that kindness with him like a shield as he walked onto the stage. And now, as the song reached its second verse, his voice grew steadier, stronger, not because he was gaining confidence but because he was no longer singing alone. He was singing for his mother, for Marcus, for every person who had ever been invisible and still chosen compassion over bitterness. And something extraordinary began to happen, something that couldn't be planned or rehearsed, because one by one, people in the audience began to rise from their seats, not at the end, not when prompted, but right there in the middle of the song, as if their bodies had decided before their minds could catch up. And it started with a teenage girl who stood up unconsciously, her eyes locked on Ethan as if he were singing directly to her. Then a couple beside her followed, then a whole section, until the movement spread like a quiet wave, and Ethan noticed it only briefly, his breath hitching when he realized what was happening. But instead of faltering, he leaned into the moment, pouring every ounce of gratitude and grief and love he had ever known into the final notes. And when the climax of the song arrived, it wasn't just his voice that filled the arena, it was the collective emotion of thousands of people standing together, united not by spectacle but by empathy. And somewhere in the crowd, Marcus the security guard stood too tears streaking down his face, knowing that a small act of kindness had rippled outward into something unimaginably large. And when the last note finally faded, there was a split second of absolute silence, the kind that feels heavier than noise, before the arena erupted, not just in applause but in something deeper, a shared release, and Ethan lowered the microphone slowly, overwhelmed, as the crowd continued to stand, clap, and cheer, not because the song was over but because something inside them had been awakened. And later, when interviews were conducted and headlines written, people would talk about Ethan's voice, his humility, the moment the crowd stood before the song even finished, but Ethan would always know the truth, that the real power of that night wasn't talent alone, it was kindness passed from one person to another, it was a security guard who chose compassion, a mother who sang through exhaustion, and a boy who learned that even in a world that often looks away, humanity still rises when given the chance. And as Ethan finally left the stage, heart pounding, he whispered a quiet thank you. Not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but to every unseen hand that had lifted him to that moment. And somewhere in a hospital room across town, his mother stirred, unaware that her son's voice had just reminded thousands of strangers that standing up for one another, even before the song is finished, can change everything.